Welcome, heathens and witches, to the Horn
and Cauldron
podcast. Yeah, I'm John Norgrove. This is Julie Norgrove. This is our witchy podcast. It's the Horn and Cauldron podcast.
Welcome.
Yeah, welcome. I don't speak enough German to finish that.
I don't either.
In my mind, I started there.
I was going for like a Dracula accent, but then I was like, I don't know why I'm going for a Dracula accent. We're not talking about literally anything.
Dracula related. They both start with a D.
They both start with a D, and they both have two A's in them.
Poor transition. We're talking about the Dagda today.
Yeah.
So this is a Dagda deep dive.
The triple D.
Double the piranhas, double the D's. You know how this works. And if you don't know that reference, that was probably insane, but I'm not going to explain it to you. Figure it the fuck out yourself. So if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like this video, comment below, share, subscribe, ring the bell, and do all that kind of stuff. If you are checking us out on the podcast network of your choice, leave us a review. That's how we know that you listened, because there's no other way. The system is broken.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll just get right into it, huh?
Yeah, we'll just get started.
Jump right in. Whomst is the Dagda?
So the Dagda, which can also be pronounced Dagda, it sort of depends on what your preference is there. And while we're talking about pronunciations, this is the drinking game for our 5 listeners, where we basically say in every episode, if we pronounce something wrong, we are sorry. We tried our best. Yep. Please let us know the correct way to pronounce it.
Yeah.
So
we don't know.
Because we don't know.
We speak English.
And
I'm from California. So.
I spend hours every podcast trying to figure out how to pronounce some of these dumb words. And it's not easy. It's not easy. It's not easy being green.
Well, and we don't speak the language. It's one of those things where it's like, we're never going to learn it.
I wouldn't mind learning the language.
It's dope.
But it takes a lot of time, and I just don't have that time.
No, not yet.
And pronunciation guides on the internet are few, far in between, and
disagree with each other.
Yeah, disagree with each other, or just don't exist. For certain words. So that's extra fun. Anyways, the Dagda is an Irish god, and he is the god of abundance, generosity, agriculture, weather, the seasons, fertility, magic, music, strength, masculinity, protection, hospitality, wisdom, life, death, time, and the sun. He is also a patron god of the Druids, and some consider him to have been the first Druid, although kind of depends on how you look at that and what kind of fables and stories and myths you're looking at. But the Dagda is also king of the Tuatha De Danann, which is the fairy people, and they eventually become the Sigi, which is also fairy people. They kind of live underground in mounds, so fairy mounds, fairy circles, that sort of thing. Yeah. But the Dagda, he's not just a god. He's a king, and he's a chieftain. He's a druid. He's one of those leaders that leads from the thick of it. He's not a leader that is like up on high.
Yeah, he's not like sitting in a throne, just like sending men to war. He's like at the front lines, kicking ass and taking names with them. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's interesting is his name means the good god, or the great god. The word Dagda, broken down and taken into ancient, tiny language, means the good god or the great god. And in particular, there's quite a few things that you can call him as far as like epithets and titles. And the best one is this quote, which is just riddled with Irish words. And again, I am sorry. So according to a translation of some of these Irish myths back from 1927, he says
Do you want me to read this?
Oh yeah,
Do you want me to read this for
you?
you?
Go ahead.
Okay, because there is a bunch of this. I don't speak Irish, so
he also has never read this quote literally before right now.
Oh yeah. I don't look at these notes before we do the podcast. So he's quoted as saying, "I am Ed Abed of Es Ruid. That is the Dagda of wizardry, the Dagda of wizardry of the Tuatha De Danann, and the Ruid. Oh boy,
Ruid Rothessa.
Ruid Rothessa, and
I put the.
I know, but that's worse because you're not using the system in place for this.
It's phonetic.
Yeah. The Yoi Olair.
Yochel Olair.
Sure. Yeah, that could be how you pronounce that.
Are my 3 names.
Those are my 3 names. Yeah. This is from Bergen, 1927.
And that basically translates to Dagda. It means good God, like we've already talked about. And Ruad Rohesa means the red or mighty one of great knowledge. And Eoched Olahar means horseman, great father, or horseman, father of all. So he's got kind of a lot happening there. So basically it's like he's the big guy. He's kind of like the all-father, but not in the same way that Odin is considered the all-father.
It's not a relationship of like Odin and Dagda, but it's like how like it's like Dagda, Odin, Zeus, they're like the top guys with all this stuff. You know what I mean?
Well, they're kind of like the top of their pantheon. Yeah. But even pantheon the Irish pantheon doesn't quite fit into the same things like puzzle pieces do, like for the Norse and the Greek pantheon and even the Egyptian pantheon.
Let's be perfectly honest here. The Norse and Greek and Egyptian pantheon do not fit together smoothly either. It's not like this is the dad and this is the mom and here's 7 kids and then everybody lived happily ever after. It's like a clusterfuck.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or for Zeus fucking a bunch of clusters.
Yeah. Yeah. So the Dagda was also called Man of the Peaks. And part of this one is interesting because peaks really in this case means horns. So in some old art, he is shown as having horns. So it is possible that he was originally sort of a zoomorphic god who had horns growing out of his head. And it is some of them are like deer's horns and some of them are like goat's horns, but definitely in some things there were horns. And that kind of also ties him a little bit more into some of the like Celtish Gaulish side of things where it's the horned god Cernunnos and that sort of thing. So he's got a lot of ties to a lot of different gods. We're going to talk a little more about that as we kind of go through this. Yeah. Because he's been compared to a lot of different gods, but really the Dagda, he is his own dude.
Yeah, totally. I've generally, if I've seen the Dagda with horns, it would be with antlers.
Yeah.
Because they're like antlers, like deer's antlers.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've seen him with like goat horns before. Not that I've seen like every fucking Dagda photo or something. That's not what I'm claiming here. I just like, when I think of the Dagda, I think of like a big fat green guy with like antlers. Very like Green Man adjacent, but like a redhead.
I mean,
like,
I can see
not like
where
with
you would
green
think
skin,
that,
but like robed in plant material.
Interesting. So he is. Oh, nice segue. He's often described as a giant. So he's either an actual giant or just like a really tall and big
He's just like a big motherfucker, yeah.
Yeah, he's always bearded. He generally wears a hooded cloak. As far as hair color, he's any color you can kind of see. He's got white hair if he's like an older Dagda. He sometimes has red hair. So he sometimes has black or dark brown hair. Yeah. Very rarely is he shown having blonde hair. But that is certainly a possibility as well, because why not? But yeah, he wears...
if Marvel gets their hands on him, they're going to make him a blonde.
They already did. So he typically does wear a hooded cloak. I know that sounds a lot like Odin, and a lot of some of the things we're talking about with him sound a lot like Odin.
A bunch of people wore hooded cloaks back then.
Yeah, that was pretty common then.
Just an outfit.
And he... So... Time for another drinking game item. So this is where I talk about the Christianization of Europe. So 5 listeners, you know what to do. So during the Christianization of Europe, we've talked about this at length in a lot of different podcast episodes. And what we basically know is that between the 8th and 11th century is when a lot of these myths and things like that started popping up. Some places later, some places earlier. And the Christianization of Europe did this thing to the mythologies and to the stories told about certain pantheons within the area that Christianity was taking over, where they kind of Christian washed them, or they made them seem a lot less cool to people who were Christians. And that's something that we see a lot of in very specifically Irish folklore. So the Dagda also wore a tunic and pants, as he would during that particular time frame. Yeah. He was not like
a naked man in a cape.
No, sometimes he's portrayed as a naked man in a cape, actually. Okay. But he more commonly dressed like regular people. So he was less like, I'm such a god wearing this shiny bright armor and it's all clean and like all my people are dressed in like, rags. He was kind of like the dude that was there with them. Mm-hmm. So comically, and we think that this really comes from that Christianization of Europe and trying to dissuade people from practicing and believing in the old ways. He was often described as wearing a tunic that was so short that it would barely cover his butt. And yeah,
that's like a weird dig. Like, oh man, I read this thing about the Dagda. This dude is so short, his tunic, you can see his butt a little bit, and it's like, okay, I don't know what that has to do with anything, but I think maybe the Dagda just had a sweet ass, and people were like, maybe that tunic get a little bit shorter. How you doing, buddy?
Let me tell you what, I really want some like pinup Dagda art.
Yeah, just I really sexy want that. Dagda art.
But not only was it so short that it would barely cover his butt, but
weird burn.
It was so short that he would just be like dragging his huge penis on the ground as he walked.
Yeah, again, this isn't a burn. I think this is just one dude's dream or one chick's dream. And they were just like, yeah, look how bad the Dagda is. And she was just like, that's what you got from them?
It would not have been a chick.
Yeah, whatever. I don't know. Whoever. You weren't allowed to have dreams back then. About sweet Dagda ass.
No,
only for us boys.
These parts of him were generally like associated with stories that made him seem like a buffoon, like a bumbling oaf. Like he was brutish and oafish and dumb. And he wasn't doing these things because it was like like silly, or anything like that.
Yeah, they're trying to turn him into like a clown man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So dragging his huge penis along the ground, and he's a giant.
I'm sorry, the correlation between this guy's a clown buffoon and look at his sweet ass hanging out in his huge dong does not directly correlate in my mind, but hell, it was a weird time back then.
Yeah, it definitely was.
It's so dumb. Oh my god, what a stupid thing to burn somebody on.
This is one of the like weirder ways.
Silly Christians, Dagdas aren't for kids.
that the syncretism kind of like happened there. Crazy. So the Dagda also had some like magical items, which are super dope. Okay. He had I'm just gonna have you pronounce these words because we're gonna play that fun game. We are right here.
Oh.
Yeah, so you get to do this.
These ones. Okay, so he had it's like Lorgmore or Lorg Anfed.
Yeah, which is a magical staff or a club or a mace. The word in old Irish language actually basically means the same thing. Yeah. And this magical staff or club or its mace, it would kill 9 men at a time, and one side of it gave life and the other side of it gave death as he chose.
Really suck if you messed up which direction he was holding in his hands.
Yeah, he's like, oh, which way is left?
He's just like, let me heal you with this mace. And they're like, I'm gonna trust the doctor? Man.
When I think of that, I think of like that moment when you're in the car and like you're trying to give directions and somebody's like, do I turn left here? And you're like, right, no, wait. And you like forget how left and right works. Yeah. So that's pretty dope. So the next item that he had
don't highlight those. That makes them dark, so they're unreadable. Corensik.
Yeah. Which is a cauldron that was never emptied. It would either refill immediately or refill overnight, depending on what stories you were listening to. And when we're talking about a cauldron, we're talking about a big boy cauldron. Because remember, the Dagda is a big boy, a nice booty. So he's got to keep those cakes nice and thick. Now, the ladle of this cauldron also is pretty important because it's talked about several times. And its ladle was so big that a man and a woman could lie side by side inside of the ladle. Very large soup spoons.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the next item.
That's Wethne or Dower de Blow.
Yeah, which is an oak harp, and that controls the seasons and emotions, and only makes sounds when the Dagda wants it to. And there is a race of people called the Formorians who found out the wrong way because they stole his harp, and then he murdered them all. Basically.
I guess that's finding out. It didn't really find out anything except for when you steal this harp. Like a dude with a mace that both brings and ends life is coming for your shit.
Yeah, he's coming for you.
Yeah, just dragging dong just through the fucking forest, right? You're just like, what is that scraping noise? No! And then you just hear the cakes, like... He's bashing people to death. Cakes are flapping in the breeze. I'm already in love with this Dagda. What's up?
Yeah.
Fucking favorite Irish god, Dagda.
Yeah. So he also had 2 pigs. And one was always growing, and the other one was always roasting. So he never ran out of food, not even just in the cauldron. So he's always got a pig on the roast and a pig in the...
In my mind, it's a pig cage. Just on fire, screaming, like, why? Why did I have to be the roasting one? Why couldn't I have been the growing one? And the growing one's just like, all of my joints hurt. This is the worst.
He also had an orchard of ever-laden fruit trees. So fruit trees that never were without...
Yeah.
Like immense amounts of fruit. Yeah. And then lastly,
what kind of
fruit? It doesn't say, but I'm imagining that apples is probably one of them. Whatever fruits they would have had. Like locally and like originally. I'm not entirely sure what fruits they would have had, but apples would certainly have been one of them. Perhaps pears. And then lastly, he had a black female cow who could make all of the other cows, when she made a special cow moo, she would make all the other cows in Ireland graze. Or not graze, depending on what she said.
Yeah. You have the wrong word there.
I know.
Okay. I was just like, that's not what that says.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I would just change that so we don't forget.
I will.
Yeah, okay, that's
so awesome. He had a bunch of really cool magical items.
Magic animals.
Yeah. As far as family goes, he had some siblings. So he had a brother named Nuada, who was the god of hunting and fishing, and Ogma, which was the god of speech, language, and poetry. But sometimes he is only shown as having a brother named Ogma, and sometimes he is kind of all 3 of those again. The Irish in particular were very into like triple deity gods, so it is very possible, much like Brigid and some of the other gods from the Irish pantheon, that it was one god that had 3 aspects and they all made up this one dude.
Yeah.
And they sort of like congealed into one over time. He had really only a couple of consorts. Like, he would get freaky with the ladies, like the peasant mortals. Obviously. Yeah. Nothing like Zeus, though.
Oh, he was like a respectable human. Good. That's nice. Good for him.
More or less.
Because Zeus not so respectable.
Yeah, more or less. So his wife was the Morrigan, who is the goddess of war and death, among other things. And their marriage and union allowed him to win a very important battle. So it's a really long and very cool tale of the Dagda. And he was also the lover of Boan, who is the goddess of rivers, like a very specific river named after her. And she sometimes is identified as being part of Brigid or being Brigid's mother. So that's a fun one. And for children, he had Angus, who's the god of youth and love. Brigid, who's the goddess of healing and blacksmithing. If you want to learn more about Brigid, we talk about her quite a bit in our Imbolc episode. And Bubdberg, who is the god of poetry and wisdom. Kermit and Aid, god of fire, and Midir, god of lakes and cunning. He had other children as well, but most of those were kind of more like demigods than like worshipable gods. But it's important to note here that a lot of these gods that I've just named, and like what it is that they say that they're for don't quite correspond directly to other pantheons, in that they don't really have the same focused qualities that is, that other pantheons have, like Aphrodite being the goddess of love, and Hera being the goddess of marriage, and Ares is the goddess of war, or the god of war, like that sort of thing. And even those gods, we know from previous episodes, they don't really have just one thing that they do. They're sort of a catch-all of a lot of things. But in the Irish pantheon, we really see a lot of that rounding out, where you don't have, all of these different gods that do very small and specific things. You have a couple of gods and they do a lot of things, but they do them all well, which is a really interesting thing to take note of with this particular pantheon. And part of the trouble with this is that, and the reason why that is because a lot of characters in Irish mythology weren't written down. We don't really have like ancient written accounts for them. It isn't until the Christianization of Europe happens that we have these stories about who these people are and what the stories are. So, it's like the telephone game. So in one town, you have this one story. Showed up,
how telephone game did it, like, did these people become?
Yeah, well, also, like, you would have this one story told a certain way in one town, and literally the next town over, same story, different points within it. So there's a lot of that happening, and we see that too in Norse mythology as well, and also a little bit with Greek. But really, it's probably the most problematic in Irish, because there's just nothing that's written down, and they didn't really have ancient travelers that came to write this stuff down. So a lot of this information didn't come about until centuries after the area had been Christianized. So we find that a lot of these stories kind of have to be compared to popular Irish saints. But many figures in Irish mythology were syncretized from being gods into being kings, or into being shape-shifting wizards, as is the case with the Tuatha Dé Danann, or even fallen angels, so that it would be okay for these people to worship these deities, kind of.
I don't know about worship, but it's okay for them to talk about it still.
Yeah.
It's like, I was praying to this guy, and you're like, no, you don't understand. That was just an evil shape-shifting wizard. You heard about those guys. You should be afraid of those guys. Really, who you were worshiping, this guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so really very little survives of the worship and practice of the deities of Ireland, and especially the Dagda, considering the most information that you look up for him has to do with one very specific myth or story about him. Although it is long and very detailed, it's just one story, and so little survives of his worship, we kind of don't really know what people would do. So we're kind of basing a lot of this stuff on conjecture and on what people feel when they are working with or worshiping the Dagda. And, we know that like Lugh and Brigid were worshipped, but we just don't really know much about the Dagda, which means that we don't really know if he, first of all, was even worshipped. He may have been feared, because we know that he becomes the king of the Tuatha Dé Danann, who are basically the fairies, and the fairies have to go underground after after a while, and the way that battles worked out. So maybe he wasn't worshipped, and maybe he was feared. But at the same time, we know that he was revered and loved by people, because he was the great god. Yeah. He was thought of as large and like this larger than life, beautiful man who was kind, and who was, gave abundance to the land. So there's a lot of really super conflicting information, and we just don't know. So if in your individual practice working with the Dagda, a lot of this information doesn't resonate for you, then that could be why, is that this isn't necessarily the way that you as a person are meant to worship the Dagda. And that really goes for a lot of other deities that we talk about as well. But I think that is especially important to note here.
Yeah, well, we don't have, like, A1 sources on this,
No.
Just dry states.
This ended up being very difficult to find information on. But the Dagda's got a few really cool stories. And in particular, I've found in looking at these that the Dagda was very cunning, like almost Loki-like in the way that he would take advantage of a situation and like find the loopholes and the ways out in a very outside the box way, like the way that Kirk did the Kobayashi Maru thing in the Star Trek movie. And people are like, but you can't do it that way. And he's like, well, I did. So what are you going to do? Nothing. So in one tale in particular, and I chose this one not necessarily because it's my favorite, because it's the one that I thought was the most interesting, but also was had the least amount of information out there. So in one tale, there's this greedy poet named Creidenbell.
Yeah, Creidenbell.
Creidenbell is the Dagda's guest. And the poet, when he sees that the Dagda's cauldron refills every night, is like, he's got more food than me. So, as the Dagda's guest, he asks the Dagda for the 3 choicest bites of the Dagda's meal in order to supplement his own meal.
He used the word choice.
Choicest.
Yeah.
The 3 best bits.
Choice, bro.
The best bites of Dagda's meal. Now, the 3 bites end up being basically a third of the Dagda's meal, because remember, giant ladle?
Yeah.
Which starves the Dagda and causes actually the Dagda's health to suffer. So the Dagda has to figure something out, but he has to comply, and he can't comply in a snarky way because of the rules and the laws of hospitality.
Yeah.
Because the Dagda is a hospitable god, and especially in the old times, like there were laws about hospitality. That Game of Thrones thing about the salt, like that's no joke. That's a thing that like happened.
Yeah.
Then so the Dagda puts 3 gold coins in his bowl, and he saves those for Creidenbell, since they would be the most valuable, the best bites of his meal. The greedy poet sees the gold and is greedy, so he wants it. But he has said that he wants to eat this food, so he eats the gold coins. And then he chokes on them. And then he dies.
I mean...
And thus the Dagda is released from the request of the greedy poet without besmirching his own honor or breaking the laws of hospitality.
Yeah. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
That is very Loki-esque. I understand.
It is. So there's a bunch of other really interesting information as far as like myths go for the Dagda. Most of what you're going to find is the story of the battle against the Fomorians and the Firbolg, which is the longest. It talks about his marriage to the Morrigan. It talks about how his harp like murderizes people. Well, it doesn't technically do it, but it helps.
The Beauty and the Beast style, like he gets woken up with a curse?
A little, but also no.
No. I'd watch that movie. So...
I would absolutely watch this as a
100%.
movie. This would be
I
great.
would watch that movie.
So, feast days and how to worship the Dagda. So, there are really sort of 2 dates that we can discern from tradition evidence that would be associated with the Dagda. And the first one would be basically Samhain, or the Feast of the Marigna, which is the time that the Dagda and the Morrigan united in marriage. So that is from October 28th to November 3rd. So a couple of days before Samhain, a couple of days after. The Irish, the way that they did most of their festivals and their worship things, they'd had the day, and then they would party 3 days before that day and 3 days after that day.
Yeah. I mean, I think we can confidently say at this point in time that everybody had parties that lasted more than a day. And modern garbage work culture is the reason why we only have 1 day.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's why I celebrate birthday week. What's up?
Put that out there.
So, during the Feast of the Marigna, there would be sacrifices and feasts and ancestor veneration. We talked a lot about Samhain practices in our Samhain episode, but not specifically about the Morrigan, but you can kind of get a general idea from what kind of things would be happening there. But this would have been primarily a festival about the Morrigan and other goddesses of war and death. So Dagda observances here during this time would be limited to sexual, marriage, or love-based type of rites.
Yeah.
Or perhaps
perhaps all 3.
Perhaps all three. All of those can be together. It's okay, guys. Yeah. So the Dagda's main festival would have been, ironically, similar to the time that we would be celebrating Odin. So that would be the winter solstice, the feast of the Dagda. This day is chosen because of the Dagda's association with the New Grange Temple. And the New Grange Temple has an alignment with the sunrise and the winter solstice. We've talked in our Imbolc episode last year about passage tombs. They're basically like underground mound buildings that have a entryway that aligns very specifically with the sunrise or the sunset on very specific days of the year. And the temple in New Grange is one of these passage tombs and has... And is associated with the Dagda, and its special alignment day is the winter solstice. And one of the myths about the Dagda is that he knocked a girl up and then caused the sun to stand still for 9 months. And the thing about the solstice is one of the reasons why solstices are called solstices is because the sun looks like it's rising in the same place. And that's not something that happens during the rest of the year. So it seems like it's standing still. Not that it's standing still in the sky, but its set and its rise and set are standing still. And people in the old times didn't have TV or the internet, so they paid a lot of attention to stuff like this. Yeah. So Feast of the Dagda, winter solstice, and to celebrate him, you would have feasts. He's a big boy. We gotta keep those cakes plump.
Plump cakes. Yeah.
Plump cakes.
He clearly likes stew of some sort. My guess would be pork stew.
He likes porridge a lot. So feasts, especially if you're sharing food with others. So potlucks would be great around this time, as well as, holding a public feast or, something like that. And for the feasts, it's highly recommended that if you're celebrating the Dagda or honoring the Dagda in any sort of way, whether you're having a big feast or just sort of like a feast for you and maybe your family, that you include porridge. Porridge is, in many accounts of the Dagda's stories, his favorite food. Very specifically a savory porridge, of which we don't have information for what exactly is in it, but there's milk.
Well, like what the base grain is.
Well, no, we know it's oats. So it's like an oat porridge with milk and with lard and with pork. So it's like a savory but creamy porridge. That's the Dagda's favorite food. But any kind of porridge really will work. I imagine that if you like a food, you like all versions of that food mostly, at least for him. Sure. Have some porridge for the Dagda. In fact, one of our spells talks about porridge. Having music, especially harp music, is something that would be especially auspicious for him. Telling stories or poems or that sort of thing. The Dagda also loves learning things, as being the god of wisdom. He likes to continue to learn things. So doing something, maybe reading a book about something you enjoy would be a good way.
Educational. Yeah,
doing something educational, but not necessarily school book class learning, but that's not excluded either.
Yeah.
And then lastly, volunteering to help the less fortunate. The Dagda is hospitable in such a way that he really gives a lot of himself to people who are needy. And that's something that is important to him, the laws of hospitality and taking care of his people, whether that's his people that he's ruling over, or whether that's sort of all of the people. He wants to make sure that people are taken care of.
Yeah.
So volunteering in a soup kitchen or something like that would also be a pretty powerful devotional act to the Dagda.
Yeah. Nice. All right. Cool.
Yeah. So next, we've got some spells, which are written by us, and they have no traditional connection to Irish practices. Yeah. Just stuff we made up. So the first one, as we've been doing in these deep dives, is an invocation to the Dagda. And since I've been having you read stuff, I'm going to have you read this one, because why not?
I don't know how to read. Why are you making fun of me?
I'm not making fun of you yet, but I can.
That's fair. That's fair. Yet. Okay. Dagda, mighty one of great knowledge, I call upon you. Grant me wisdom so that I may know all that I need. Bless me with abundance so that I might never go hungry. show me how to live generously so that I can teach others the way. And then you like provide an offering or like do ritual work or like meditate or whatever.
You could even do the spell we're about ready to tell you after this.
Read a book. And then end with Dagda, great father of all, the good God, I thank you.
Yeah, so that's a pretty simple invocation to the Dagda. Yeah. It kind of hits a lot of his core tenets there. And next, and this is something that you can do in the middle of that invocation if you wish, or you can
do
have
the invocation,
this...
do the spell, outro the invocation.
Yeah.
Or like do something else.
Yeah, exactly. You can do this next spell as like part of that. You can do this as part of a ritual for something else. You can do this. Really, it's simple enough that you can kind of do this as a daily devotional practice if you really wanted to. So this is like a little fun simple kitchen witchy sort of spell. So this is a porridge abundance spell. And what you'll need is the porridge of your choice. Whatever you want. Oat, rice, nut flour, however you want to do. Nut flour
porridges, but I think that's just called peanut butter.
No, honey. No, it's not.
I think peanut butter is just nut flour porridge. Think about it. I'm not wrong.
You are wrong. That's not peanut butter.
Not wrong. What's peanut butter? Oil, flourized nuts.
But you also need like a liquid to make a porridge.
Yeah. That's the oil.
No, like a water or like milk.
You make milk peanut butter. I'm not stopping you. It's called peanut butter fudge.
That's... Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, so you're going to get a porridge of your choice. It doesn't matter what it is, whatever you want to eat, whatever your dietary restrictions cause you to eat. You're going to want a sweetener such as honey or maple syrup. And then you're going to want a little bit of salt and some fruit of your choice. So in separate bowls or containers, put a pinch of salt and some fruit that's been cut into bite-sized pieces. Or if it's already bite-sized pieces, you don't need to cut it more, like blackberries or whatever.
Yeah.
And then make your porridge according to the directions and your personal preference. So however you want to do that, you do that. Now, before you eat the porridge, put it in the bowl. Sprinkle the salt on top of the porridge and say, may friends and family always find hospitality in my home. Next, you'll scatter the fruit on the porridge and you'll say, may our bowls never be empty. And next, you'll drizzle the honey or the maple syrup on the porridge and you'll say, may we always attract health and happiness. Now, while you eat, meditate on abundance or working with the Dagda, or just kind of like zone out and eat. There's really no reason that you can't just zone out and enjoy your meal. When you're almost done, you're going to want to save the last 3 bites for the Dagda. And when you've done that, you'll say, oh, great Dagda, bless me with abundance, joy, and make sure I always have a place to call home. Yeah. And that's it.
Put those 3 bites on your altar.
Yeah. Leave them as an offering.
Food offerings.
Leave your little plate out for a little while. That's what I did because I was too lazy to put it onto the offering plate and then clean the offering plate and then wash the offering plate because I had just washed the offering plate. So I just left the plate that I ate breakfast in on my altar for a little while. Yeah. It was nice. Nice and simple little kitchen witchery stuff.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And the nice thing about this is it really allows you to be able to take like a kitchen witch spell and just sort of mold it to whatever you have around. Like, you don't like apples? Fine, use blackberries. You don't like apples or blackberries? Okay, use bananas or something. Like, it doesn't matter. You know, if you don't have honey or maple syrup, sprinkle sugar instead. You know, obviously really the kind of only thing that doesn't work with that is a savory porridge.
If you don't eat sweeteners, then do something like, it's all about the like logical correlative symbolism of the request and the ingredient step.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Exactly.
So that's been most of the information about the Dagda. So yeah, we've just been chugging right along.
It's a quick one.
Yeah, I am surprised.
It's a real quick one.
Yeah. So next we have correspondences, aka me reading a list of things.
Yep. List of stuff here.
Lists of stuff. So to recap, the Dagda is the god god of abundance and weather, agriculture, the seasons, fertility. He's the god of magic and music and strength. He's the god of protection, hospitality, wisdom, life and death and time. He's also the god of the sun, a patron god of the Druids, and king of the Tuatha Danann, or the Fae folk. Animals associated with him would be cows or horses or pigs. and his colors would be red or green. As far as stones go, anything that's basically red or green or white, but also red jasper, yellow jasper, moss agate, garnet. And for plants, oak and acorn, cedar, chamomile, hawthorn, juniper, and orange. Other deities that are similar to him, most of which we've talked about, are Cernunnos, Odin, Thor, Hades. Osiris also has some pieces there. And for food, he's a pretty simple dude. So beer and biscuits and butter, porridge, oats, whiskey, and also any homegrown food, because he's a god of agriculture and abundance.
I like the way this guy eats. I'm with him.
Simple stuff. Yeah. Simple stuff. And then other things that he's associated with would, of course, be cauldrons and harps and maces or staffs. He's also very attuned to earth and fire elements. Of course, anything related to the Fae he would be attracted to, as well as music. Yeah, so that's the deep dive on the Dagda. That is a
quick deep dive on the Dagda. Yeah, there was a lot going on in there, but we got through it pretty quick. Like, obviously, there's always more to learn. So if you would like some more information on that, I highly recommend books and research. Read a book in honor of the Dagda whilst studying the Dagda.
Yeah, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about him as time goes on, because I was recommended some books that sounded very, very good.
Yeah,
that talk about him.
Yeah. Well, and also, like, he'll come up anytime we do like a Fae-based episode, what with him being the king thereof and therein.
Yeah, and we will eventually do a family tree for the Tuatha De Danann. Mm-hmm. I don't know exactly when that's going to happen, but it will happen eventually.
That'll actually honestly be a pretty quick family tree compared to most of these other pantheons, but yeah, it'll be very interesting. I only know like a very, very small amount of the Tuatha De Danann, and a lot of it is like F-level research, it's like an author who got really into this stuff when he visited Ireland, and he included it in a story of his, and then in like the 10-page prologue of his fantasy story, he's just like, look at all this information that I found. Like that kind of stuff. Or like a TV series, or like a Science Channel, History Channel kind of thing. About the Tuatha De Danann. But yeah, so that was the Dagda deep dive. Let's do a shout out to our patrons, Alan, Miranda, Helena, and Alexa. Thank you guys, you're awesome. If you would also like to be awesome, you can join our Patreon. We have a Patreon. And you can support more fun witchy content like this. If you sign up for the Horn and Cauldron podcast tier of our Patreon, you get access to our Discord, where we can chit chat about anything and everything, as well as you get Book of Shadows pages.
That's right.
Yeah,
we're a little behind on those, but it has been a busy
very busy time, season. And those are not easy to do. Let me tell you what. Yeah. So we're a little behind, but that's fine. They're still coming out. Like, I'm still doing the research on all of them. Some are like, oh, this is simple, and then some you're like, oh, we're just talking about like concepts. How do I make a picture of a concept? What am I gonna do?
Yeah. Well, and it was easier to do them in the summertime when it was like warm outside, and we're like, all we want to do is be in the house and not move because it's hot and humid where we live. But now in the wintertime, it's very nice outside, and we also
do like weird yard work and stuff.
Yeah, we also have to do like weird yard work because we have like an old house on a bunch of land, and that requires you to
do work winter and summer.
Weird work in the wintertime. Yeah.
Good time for chainsawing.
Yeah.
Night digging and chainsawing. You know what I'm talking about? Being a creepy landowner, we just digging a hole in the middle of the night.
You know what? It wouldn't be
trying to fix something. I'll tell you what, man. I've had to cut down a tree with an axe in a rainstorm. So
yeah, it wouldn't be like a
here.
full winter season without you using some sort of power tool to cut trees outside. The first year we lived in this place, you had to use what was it, a sawzall to cut down a little tree that was like that had. That was just a hand.
That was just a hand saw.
It was a hand saw.
Yeah, because we didn't have an extension cord, and I only have a plug-in sawzall.
Yeah,
I don't have a battery operated one yet for reasons I don't.
Our extension cord probably wasn't long enough.
Yeah, no. So I had to just cut down a tree with a handsaw by hand
during a storm.
Like during a storm, because it had like leaned over and was leaning against the house, and it was just
like into a window.
Yeah, so it was like, all right, well, I'll just cut this down. Like pouring rain.
It was almost dark too.
Yeah, that was a fun one. That was a fun.
Yeah,
one.
we had just come home
chasing chickens through the woods because it escaped in the winter time,
and then we ended up eating it anyway.
It's good times. Good times had by all. But yeah, so coming up next, we've got our first pub chat.
Woo! Spirit hands.
Where so on the off Mondays we are going to start doing pub chats. So that's going to be a new series within the podcast. So these aren't going to follow the same numbers as like the full episodes. The full episodes are like specific about a thing, what with it'll be in the name and such. And these pub chats are just going to be like whatever like weird pop culture or like modern heathenry thing or witchy
like questions
thing
from listeners.
Or if we have questions from listeners that have built up, we can like jump on those, or just kind of whatever. They're gonna be a little bit more short form, a little bit more free form, but yeah, they're still gonna come out every other week. They're just gonna be on the off weeks from the regular podcast, and those should be fun.
Yeah, we're pretty excited to be going to every week type of thing.
Yeah, we're gonna be every week format, long short, just like that.
Yeah, so after the first pub chat, which will be next week, if you're listening to this when this comes out, the next full or mega length,
I would just say full length.
Yeah, the next full length episode will be on about the 17th, so it'll be in 2 weeks, and that one's going to be Spellcrafting 102, and we're going to be talking about book shadows and grimoires.
Yeah.
And what they are, and how to make them, and what the heck to do with them.
Yeah. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? How are you doing it? And all that stuff. Yeah. So that's gonna be super exciting. But I have been John Norgrove. This has been Julie Norgrove. Mm-hmm. This has been the Horn
and Cauldron
podcast, and we will catch you guys on the flip side. Stay magical, folks.
Yeah, and don't forget, breathe in self-confidence, breathe out self-doubt.
She remembered it this time.
I sure did.
Yeah.